Hello, and welcome back to David Galata Book Dreamer. I'm David Galata, and I tend to dream up my books through my dreams. Just wanted to talk today a little bit about science fiction as a general topic, while I'm here. And there's been some interesting comparisons with science fiction being something that talks more about technology than it does about humanity. And I think that's actually quite false. Uh, Saw a quote, and I don't know who said it. I should, but I don't remember offhand. Is that it's not that science fiction predicted the car, it's that it predicts the traffic jam that's more important. And this is the real issue here, is science fiction showing how humanity may or may not alter its behavior based on technology. A lot of people did not foresee the common use of laptops, for example, or tablets, or even the invention of the cell phone as quickly as it happened. They also didn't foresee the way in which these devices were going to be used. Mainly, they thought it was going to be used for business or for the sciences or for government, but that the average person would not have a computer in their home. And I remember this growing up as a kid, and I remember thinking to myself, "Oh, I don't think so. Once these devices are going to be available for anyone, everyone's going to want one for a variety of reasons." Science fiction has a bit of a job of looking at humanity and how it has responded to things in the past and looking at what might be coming up in terms of technology and how are we going to adapt to it? How are we going to evolve as a species with these new technologies? How are we going to use them and misuse them? There's a lot of science fiction that has become very ideologically driven. And I think that's a mistake because I'm not sure if anyone from 30 years ago could have necessarily seen where the ideologies have gone today and the methods in which they use them. I think a lot of times we miss that human picture when we're trying to think about, well, if someone invents lightsabers, how are they going to be used? Uh, eh, Probably for things that we haven't even thought of yet. So it's good to have a lot of imagination, but it's also good to look at history. We find, and technology is old. Please understand this too. A lot of people talk about, well, this is a non-technological culture, or, well, this is before we had technology. I'm sorry. The first time someone took a stick, sharpened the point, and then hardened it in the fire, that's technology. The first time someone took a rock and knapped it to make an arrowhead or a spear point, that's technology too. The wheel's been around for a long time. I mean, like, wow, a really long time. These are all technological innovations. Starting that fire to begin with was a technological marvel in its day. We have come to the point where our technology is so grandiose that we can't even picture those items that I've just mentioned as being technology, but they are. They are a form of technology. They may not be a form of industry. That's a different animal. They were not mass manufactured. That's a different thing. And those items, industrial technology, are more recent in terms of human history. They are much more recent. They're only a couple hundred years old. I mean, you're talking about the first steam powered machine. And that really didn't crop up until just a couple hundred years ago. Barely. The typewriter came out around the time of the American Revolution or shortly after. That's a piece of technology too, and it was very different in those days. Uh, so we are looking at technology through a lens that may not be accurate. We need to take the lenses off and really look at how human beings adapt to technological changes and understand that we have a lot of material to work with here. If you look at archaeology and if you look at human history, you end up with a lot of information about how technological changes drove cultures or destroyed cultures. Now, when used judiciously, I think technology is a wonderful thing. I certainly enjoy using our modern technology in order to make these videos that you can enjoy and think about. All right, this is a communication technology. That's wonderful. However, we don't always use technology wisely. Uh, Plastics, for the most part, are made from petrol. And what's interesting to me is so many people have gotten so used to it, they're not even sure what is made of petroleum or not. For example, in the arts, I bumped into someone who said that they don't do oil painting because they're against big oil. Oil painting is not done with petroleum. It's done with linseed oil, which is flaxseed. That's a plant. It's renewable. The stem of the flax can also be used to make linen, on which you can paint your pigments on. Acrylic painting, however, everything that's acrylic is made out of a petroleum emulsion. But most artists don't actually seem to know this. And they get very riled up sometimes about the power of big oil, but they are supporting big oil every time they buy another tube of acrylic paint. This is a shift, I think, where we can no longer tell what technologies are driving what, which technologies are truly necessary or are useful, and which ones are being destructive. It has been mashed together so firmly that we, in our ignorance, are no longer understanding how things are made. When you look at something like a sweater or a shirt or a pair of socks, you can kind of figure out how that was made, though all of these things are made by machine now. No one's hand stitching cloth anymore. And where they are doing that, it's considered artisan work, which is very expensive. I'm not saying these things are bad or good. I'm not making that judgment call. But what I am trying to say is that when you get to a point where technology is no longer truly understood, that it becomes harder for a science fiction writer to figure out how future technologies are going to change the face of humanity. That's the issue. That is the actual issue here. There have been some very successful science fiction authors, not in terms of what devices that they predicted coming into play, but how society responds to them. Huxley comes to mind to me. I think his warnings are very true today as they were the day he wrote them. The same with Orwell. Some people would say, well, were these really science fiction authors? Yes, they were. Yes, they were. Heinlein does not really get into a lot of technology in Stranger in a Strange Land, but he does talk a lot about how society altered itself in the face of technological changes. It was more about the people and less about the machinery. That was something that I really held on to in writing Crew of Ganges. I wanted to present the people who lived in this massive spaceship. I wanted to present their culture Whether it was shocking for the modern reader or not, that part I didn't care. I wanted to show what my thoughts were on how humanity itself would shift and change in an environment like that. It's a thought experiment about how humanity adapts to technological changes. That's the other thing I think that science fiction is also very good for, especially when it focuses on humanity and not on the technology. Although you can have both. Don't get me wrong. You can always have both. That's wonderful. Frank Herbert, good example of that. And Isaac Asimov, for that matter. What I wanted to show is that if you are writing science fiction, you are not in a safe zone. You are going to offend someone. That's going to happen. It's going to happen. People are going to look at this and go, wow, what is this? It's okay. This is a thought experiment. It's not real. It's fiction. It's a what if situation. But if your what if sounds exactly like the 20th century or the 21st century or the 19th century, you're not really thinking ahead. There are certain base things about humanity that's not going to change. Some people are going to be greedy. Some people are going to be altruistic. Some people are, going to have their issues and their problems, and other people are going to be oblivious to it all. You're going to have the human drama no matter what, because that's what we are, not who we are. It's part of what we are. But you're also going to have shifts in outlook. For example, in Crew of Ganges, you have a culture that is deeply committed to a particular mission that doesn't have an end point. It has a task that is an ongoing task, and they are very committed to that task, except for the strifers. And yet, they remain human beings. But how does that warp and shift humanity? How does that change how humans respond and react to things? And these were some of the questions that I wanted to answer. I don't really mind if someone is offended by my work. That's okay. If my crew do not seem like a model of early 21st century society, well, that's a good thing. It's not supposed to. It's supposed to look different. It's supposed to sound different. It's supposed to be different. I'm not saying it's better or worse, but it will be different. We humans do adapt and change over time, and I think that's a very important point to make in science fiction in particular. Fantasy can also do that. Fantasy can also play with ideas, putting them together. And to me, it's not enough to just say, okay, let's just make up, a fantasy world and toss some people in it, and we're just going to do things our way. Think about it. Think about the environment. Think about the environment that you've created for these people to live in. How's that going to affect them? That fantasy environment, if you really want to breathe a three-dimensional life into it, you have to take into account how cultures might arise under certain conditions. If magic were as easy as snapping your finger and waving a magic wand and speaking a word, that would change humanity deeply as the invention of the computer, of the gun, of the sword, of the spear. It would be a massive change to humanity, which means the cultures that would then arise and adapt to that would themselves look nothing like the cultures that exist today. So it's up to the fiction writer to puzzle that piece out so that it makes sense to the reader and challenge the reader's preconceived ideas about humanity. I like doing that personally. I like to challenge our assumptions about humanity. And science fiction in particular, I think, is a wonderful platform to challenge how we view ourselves. And that is very important because we cannot grow as a people if we can't look at our pitfalls and foibles and how we change and where we don't change. That's very important. Wow, there we go. A lot of deep talking here. You can agree with me or not. Hey, either which way, put in a comment. I would love to hear from you. I'd love to see a discussion going if possible. In the meantime, please do subscribe, and thank you so much for watching. And I'll see you next week right here on David Gullotta Book Dreamer. Thank you so much. Take care.